After over 2 years since the release of Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree is finally here. But if you're like many, you may not be ready for what's coming in the land of Shadow. But fret not, Tarnished, because over the next hour, we're going over some of our best builds, pro tips from a speedrunner, and everything you need to know and do to best prep yourself for Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. First, let's get you better prepared for the next Elden Ring adventure with our list of things to do before diving into Shadow of the Erdtree.
Dearest Mikola.
Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is fast approaching, and there are a number of things you should do to prepare for the DLC and its many new challenges. In a game as big as Elden Ring, that list could practically go on forever. So we've condensed this video down to 9 main tasks. These are based both on what we know is coming in the DLC, as well as speculation from the community about some of the greater challenges and new bits of lore that may be in store for us in the Land of Shadow. Also, it's important to state that this DLC is not intended for brand new players. Just reaching the new content in Shadow of the Erdtree requires you to have cleared some difficult mid to late game encounters. If you're an Elden Ring newcomer, consider checking out our other guides for combat tips or things the game doesn't tell you. For the more experienced Tarnished out there, let's do this. The very first thing you need to do to prepare for Shadow of the Erdtree is make a choice: to start the DLC with a save file from a standard playthrough, or witness one of the game's endings and go in with New Game Plus. Only you can make that decision, but here are some things to consider. If you decide to go in with a totally new character, you'll need to do everything on this list, rather than just double checking what you've already cleared. The upside is that you could discover a fresh, fun build to take on the new challenges in the DLC. We'll talk more about builds in a bit. If you've finished the game but not converted that save into a New Game Plus run, then you should already have pretty much everything you'll need to start Shadow of the Erdtree with your best gear already equipped. If you do decide to play the DLC on New Game Plus, remember that it makes all parts of the game harder by its very nature, giving enemies more health and greater attack power. The flip side is that they'll grant more runes, which you can use to further increase your own power, but that's the consideration you have to make before even starting on the path toward the DLC. Hand in hand with New Game Plus is the question of what level you should be before taking on Shadow of the Erdtree. It's important to note that the DLC will introduce a new separate leveling system. Without knowing the details of that, this is really a question of maximizing your level within the base game. You should also grab yourself a few larval tiers if you decide to respec based on new encounters in the DLC. See the first link in the video description if you need help tracking down a few. We don't currently know if there will be more in Shadow of the Erdtree, or if the new leveling system will have an additional method of respecing. Regardless, most players will find themselves above level 100 as they near the end of the game. Taking on optional bosses like Mohg or Malenia, for example, is only recommended if you are in the 120s or 30s. If you have yet to clear every mini-dungeon, or if you've left a few great enemies alive, now's the time to take care of them. If you're looking to boost yourself quickly, we do have an updated rune farming guide you can use to get those numbers flowing. This might also be a good reason to go into the DLC via New Game Plus if you're considering it. That way you can fight the demigods for tons of runes and a second helping of their remembrances. Speaking of bosses, there are 2 you must defeat before you can start Shadow of the Erdtree. The first is General Radahn. We're not exactly sure why this is a requirement for the DLC, but director Hidetaka Miyazaki has confirmed as much. Radahn is not the first demigod we recommend taking on with any fresh character. At a minimum, you want to be above level 60, but preferably in the 70s. If you do go to Redmane Castle early, be prepared for heavy resistance around and inside the fortress. However, if you progress through the game and reach the Altus Plateau before visiting the castle, it'll actually be completely empty. In either case, you'll still have to face Radahn in one of the game's most epic and memorable fights. The other boss you must beat is Mohg, Lord of Blood. Confronting him in Mohgwyn Palace is a long and involved process, so we're going to refer to our guide on the fastest way to access the DLC for all the details there. But remember, there are a few branching paths that lead there. First, there's an online PvP and an offline PvE version of White Mask Vare's questline. Once you've communed with the Two Fingers for the first time, he'll appear at the Rose Church in Liurnia of the Lakes. The third path requires you to reach the Consecrated Snowfield, a hidden endgame area you can only access with 2 halves of a special medallion. Again, we have a whole other video guide for that, so give that a go if you need assistance reaching the Snowfield and the preceding region, Miquella's Erdtree. You might actually want to push into the Erdtree and explore that sprawling legacy dungeon more thoroughly. The tree was sprouted by Miquella, whose lifeless body now lies in an egg atop Mohg's palace. It would be good to familiarize yourself with this lore before starting the DLC, as it's going to be expanded upon in the new content. There is no shortage of information and speculation about Miquella out there on the internet, but the short version of the official story is this. Cursed to live as a child forever, Miquella grew the Erdtree as a way to remove the Scarlet Rot from their sister Malenia. Unfortunately, they were stolen away by Mohg before this process was complete. Their corpse remains in the egg while their spirit navigates the Land of Shadow. There is also a rumor that they are not just Miquella, but also Saint Trina, a figure associated with sleep. The saint is teased at the end of the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer, so we're expecting to learn more about this in the DLC. In the meantime, if you are brave enough to explore the whole Erdtree and take on Miquella's guardian sister Malenia, you can learn more about their sibling relationship. Good luck with that. She's known for being one of, if not the toughest fight in the whole game. We do have a boss guide in the description that can help. You'll want to pick your best build not just for the Malenia fight, but also for all of Shadow of the Erdtree. We've already put together a video guide of 7 recommended builds, based on what we know and expect to encounter in the DLC, and that video is linked in the description as well. To quickly summarize, we know that there will be a poison area, so poison-resistant gear is a must for that. We also know that the new boss Messmer uses fire attacks, so you'll want fire resistance too. Beyond that, you'll want to maximize your personal build with all the spells, talismans, ashes of war, and spirit ash summons that best suit your playstyle. Ignore the haters. Get that mimic tier ready to go. The rune farming we mentioned earlier comes into play again here, but you should also take care to maximize your flasks of Crimson and Cerulean tiers. That means collecting every golden seed and sacred tier, which will increase the number of flasks you can carry and their effectiveness, respectively. For a list of all golden seed and sacred tier locations, as well as recommendations for the best accessories and spirit summons, follow the links in the video description. For a quick list, these are some of the best talismans in the game: the Great Jar's Arsenal, Assassin's Crimson and Cerulean Daggers, Crimson Amber Medallion, the classic Erdtree's Favor, and the multi-purpose Radagon's Source Seal. For Spirit Ash summons, you can't go wrong with the Mimic tier. Other great choices include Black Knife Tish, the Great Shield Soldiers, Latenna the Albinoric, and Omen Killer Rollo. Upgrading those requires Grave or Ghost Gloveworts, depending on the type of spirit. You can occasionally find these out in the world or inside catacomb dungeons, but you can also buy them once you visit the Twin Maiden Husks at Round Table Hold and hand over certain bell bearings. Glovewort Picker's Bell Bearing 1 is your prize for clearing the Windham Catacombs on Mount Gelmir. Clear the Giants Mountaintops Catacombs up north for Bearing 2. The third is found in Crumbling Farum Azula, in a gazebo at the southern tip by the small lake. From the Crumbling Beast Grave Depth Site of Grace, head west and take the lift down to reach this area. There are also 3 Ghost Glovewort Pickers bell bearings to obtain. The first is on a body at another gazebo in Nokron Eternal City, right down the steps from the Site of Grace of the same name. The second is at its sister city Noxtella. From the Site of Grace at the city entrance, head up the stairs and take a left to find the chest inside the first door. The last bearing is found in the graveyard at the bottom of Elefel, Brace of the Erdtree. There are also links to help you prepare for the new gear we're going to discover in Shadow of the Erdtree. We already know that 8 new weapon types are on the way, and you can prepare to upgrade them by building up your collection of smithing stones. These are dropped by enemies and found in many mining dungeons, but they can also be purchased if you hand over the right bells and bell bearings to the Twin Maiden Husks in Round Table Hold. Note that for the top tier Ancient Dragon smithing stones, there are a limited number available in the game. This might be yet another reason to choose New Game Plus for your playthrough, but regardless, we have every location marked in the second to last link in the description. There is one last little thing you should probably prepare for, and that's the Madness status effect. It doesn't come up too often in Elden Ring, so it wasn't necessarily expected in the DLC, but then From Software showed us a picture of this freak. Bloodborne fans immediately thought of that game's Winter Lantern, so there's heavy speculation that this thing will induce madness in any Tarnished who gets too close. There is no madness-resistant gear in Elden Ring, but you can raise your innate resistance to it with the Focus stat. To increase that, you'll need to level up your mind. You can also clear up your madness meter with the Lucidity spell or Clarifying Boluses. For the spell, you'll need to defeat Preceptor Miriam in the Inverted Carrion Study Hall. If you don't know how to get there, don't worry, just hit the final link in the description here. Crafting Clarifying Boluses is simpler, but you'll need to learn the recipe from the Frenzied's cookbook. Grab it off the body in Frenzied Flame Village here in Northern Liurnia. Then mix 2 Dew-Kissed Herba, 1 Crystal Cave Moss, and 1 Eye of Yellow. If you haven't come across any of those in your travels, you can always go for the Lucidity Sorcery. It's worth it to save your sanity.
Getting around Elden Ring's vast map may be a little tricky, even more so if you haven't played the game in a while. That's okay, because we got you covered, and we have the most optimal route that will have you giving Miquella a high five in no time.
Elden Ring's only expansion is fast approaching, and in true FromSoft fashion, the method for accessing it will be a bit obtuse. We're here to make sure you have everything you need to start Shadow of the Erdtree when it launches. To even begin Shadow of the Erdtree, you need to take out one of the game's most difficult bosses, Mohg, Lord of Blood. We already have full area and boss guides on Mohg, and a video on how to best be prepared for Shadow of the Erdtree. So even though we don't recommend going straight to the DLC access point at a very early level, we'll just use this video to go over the necessities of how to get to the right place to start it, and we'll point you to our other walkthroughs for the big sticking points. We know from interviews from Famitsu and others with the game's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, that at least 2 bosses need to be defeated to access the DLC. Starscourge Radahn, whom you can fight after accessing the Altus Plateau or completing a section of Ranni the Witch's questline, and the aforementioned Mohg, after which you need to touch the arm coming out of the cocoon behind Mohg. We don't know if any more steps will be necessary until the DLC actually launches, but this guide will present the quickest way to getting past these 2 hurdles that have been explicitly mentioned. Mohg makes a lot of sense, since the access point for the DLC is in his boss arena, but we don't know exactly why Radahn needs to be defeated yet. Since beating him causes a change in the world state, it's most likely something to do with that. If playing on a fresh save file and not in New Game Plus, we recommend following our story walkthrough up until Mohg, or at least using some rune farming exploits that we've gone over in our video on how to level quickly, a few of which we'll detail later. Shadow of the Erdtree should be comparable to endgame content, so rushing to it on a fresh save file without any grinding may set you up for a world of hurt. If you've already played through Elden Ring and want to get to Shadow of the Erdtree on New Game Plus, you can feel comfortable beelining it to Radahn and Mohg much faster, especially since the map will be easier to navigate without having to obtain the individual map fragments again. We mentioned up top that there were a few ways to trigger Radahn's festival, meaning his boss fight, and the quickest way we found on New Game Plus is getting to the Altus Plateau after defeating Magma Worm Makar. The other method for getting to the plateau, which may be the easier way on a fresh save file, is to find both halves of the Dectus Medallion in Forts Height and Faroth respectively, using the Grand Lift of Dectus, and activating the first Sight of Grace. You can run straight through these forts without fighting to grab the medallion halves, but it'll be a bit harder to find your way to them without first filling in the map with map fragments. We found it quicker to beeline it to Makar to force your way onto the plateau, but the choice is yours if you'd rather use the medallion. Let's get started. Exit the tutorial cave, interact with the first Sight of Grace in Limgrave, the first steps, and talk to White Mask Varé.
Oh yes, tarnished, are we?
Ride to the gate front Sight of Grace, and interact with it to rest and speak to Melina. If this is a New Game Plus file, this will also be a good time to spend the runes you may have received from finishing the game. Ride through the gate to the Stormhill Shack, making sure to avoid the giant troll who will land in the plaza. Interact with the Stormhill Shack site of Grace. Continue riding north under the bridge to bypass Stormvale Castle, head off for the left side of the bridge as it comes to the end, and follow the path around to the left, and then to the right as it enters a tunnel hugging the cliffside. Continue on this path until you enter Liurnia and interact with the lake-facing cliffs side of Grace. Continue to ride northwest through Liurnia, interacting with sites of grace you see along the way, especially ones that are close to the Rose Church, like fallen ruins of the lake right here. You'll need to come back to the Rose Church later, so it's a good spot to remember. Continue around the west side of Raya Lucaria and enter the ravine to the north of Liurnia, and activate the ravine side of Grace. Make sure you look out for giant lobsters and some lightning bolts on the way. Follow the ravine all the way to the end where you'll find another side of Grace next to a ladder. Go up the ladders and continue into the cave. Take the ladder up to the left, take the first right once you enter a big open room, and go up the elevator. Continue forward as the path bends to the right, and take the second left when you see the wooden stairs on the right. You'll come out the other side and see the new ruin-strewn precipice side of Grace. Continue up the elevators and ladders as you ascend the cliff, but look out for bats and harpies along the way. It's hard to get lost here if you just keep moving up, just be careful of your footing so you don't fall off the side. Eventually you'll come to the ruin-strewn precipice overlook side of Grace, right outside the boss room. Up until this point you could speed straight through before fighting any enemies, but next you'll have to take out a boss, Magma Worm Makar. This can be difficult if you're playing on a fresh save file and haven't spent any time leveling, but it's still doable. Makar's attacks are very telegraphed, so stick to his side, pay attention anytime he rears up, and be ready to roll towards him when he attacks with his sword to power through with your invincibility frames. Give him space when he walks and spews lava, and continue to move perpendicular to his path to stay out of his way, and wait for him to repeat this attack once or twice. Once you're close, he'll also crane his neck 90 degrees and spit lava to the side, but this is easy to avoid if you see it coming. After hitting 50% health, he'll stand up on his hind legs and set his sword on fire. You'll have to be much more careful of his big swings, as many of them are likely to kill you in one hit, and some of them are more delayed than you'd think. It can be tricky to learn the timing. If you're finding this fight too difficult on a fresh save, we recommend leveling up using one of the exploits we explain in our How to Level Quickly video, such as grabbing this bleed weapon, the Morning Star from this carriage in the Weeping Peninsula, killing the sleeping dragon at this location so its brood dies, and running back to the site of Grace before the big dragon disappears so it respawns and you can kill it again to repeat the process. After using this exploit to level a bit, Makar should go down much more easily. After defeating Magma Worm Makar, exit the dungeon to find yourself on the Altus Plateau. Now we can head to Radon. Interact with the nearby abandoned coffin site of Grace, and warp back to the Stormhill Shack. Ride east from Stormhill Shack following the road all the way to Caelid, crossing the Saints Bridge and the Summonwater Village as you go. Make sure to continue grabbing sites of grace along the way in case you die somewhere. Right along the main road in Caelid to the southeast to reach Redmane Castle. It's a bit of a long ride, but not too bad. Alternatively, if you don't feel like riding that far, you can use the Celia Crystal Cave trick. Head to the Dragon Burnt Ruins in Limgrave in the lake bed directly east from the first step side of Grace. Inside, you'll find a cellar full of rats and a trap chest that teleports you to the Celia Crystal Tunnel in Caelid, getting you much closer to your destination. Run out of the cave back to the entrance and activate this Site of Grace. Hop on Torrent, right down to the beachfront, then go left and follow the beach until you find the Celia Understair Site of Grace. Head up the nearby staircase into the Town of Sorcery, and immediately head south along the main road through the town and out the front gate. Keep on following the road south-southwest, and you'll pass Celia Gateway and eventually come to the Merchant. You should now be able to see Redmane Castle to the southeast. Keep following the road towards the castle, looking out for the giant dogs that can swarm you if you're not careful, until you reach a giant siege machine and the impassable Great Bridge Site of Grace, just outside Redmane Castle. Look for the Sending Gate next to the impassable Bridge Site of Grace to take you straight to Redmane's Castle Plaza. This Sending Gate is only available after you've gone to the Altus Plateau, and the Castle Plaza will also now be free of enemies. Go speak to the Herald after climbing the staircase, and he'll open the door for you to enter. Go down the elevator, and go through the beachside Sending Gate to Radon's boss fight. This is going to be another huge sticking point if you're not leveled enough, and we recommend being at minimum level 60, or preferably level 70, before taking him on. So you may want to grind a bit more unless you feel like really challenging yourself. If you're still rusty on this battle, we have a full guide for it on YouTube and IGN.com. Alright, one part done. After defeating Radon, if you haven't been to the Round Table Hold, go to a Site of Grace and tell Melina you want to go there now. Since you've defeated a Shardbearer, you can now go speak to the Two Fingers. Warp back to the Rose Church in Liurnia and speak to White Mask Voré again. Tell him you weren't impressed with the Two Fingers.
Aha! Your intuition serves you well.
You'll next have to complete Vare's quest to receive the item you need to warp to Mogwin's palace. Vare will give you a task to invade 3 players' games, and 5 festering bloody fingers in order to do so. You don't have to defeat 3 players, only invade 3 of them, so you can invade and then simply jump off a cliff if you don't want to bother fighting. Since you've already unlocked the Altus Plateau, you can also go to the Writhe-Blood Ruins and invade and defeat an NPC named Magnus the Beastclaw once, rather than invading real players 3 times. This is also the only way to finish Vare's quest if you're playing offline. Return to Vare after completing your task, and choose to be anointed to receive the Lord of Blood's favor, and one more task, to soak the cloth in a maiden's blood. There are 3 ways to do this. The first is to kill Arena on the Weeping Peninsula just past the Bridge of Sacrifice in Limgrave. If you haven't progressed her questline, she'll be seated near the road. Kill her, and soak the cloth in her blood. Note that this will lock you out of Edgar's questline. The second option is at the Church of Inhibition in northern Liurnia, just north of the Frenzied Flame village. Once you get close, you'll be invaded by Festering Finger Vike. After defeating him, head into the church, activate the Site of Grace, and go to the Dead Maiden just to the left to soak the cloth in her blood. Keep in mind this method is actually pretty difficult. You've got to dodge multiple Eyes of Sauron that inflict madness, and Vike is no pushover, so just be careful if you decide to go this way, and take some madness relieving medicine with you. The third option to find Maiden's Blood is in the Chapel of Anticipation, back where you first started your Elden Ring journey. To get there, head to the 4 belfries on the western coast of the Liurnia of the Lakes region. The second belfry from the top, the one with the message Precipice of Anticipation out front, will take you back to the Chapel of Anticipation, but you'll need an imbued sword key to activate it. One of these keys can be found in the topmost belfry, but if you've already used that one, there's another in the Academy of Raya Lucaria and one in Celia, Town of Sorcery. Their exact locations are in more detail on the Stone Sword Key page on IGN.com. Once at the chapel, you'll have to kill the Grafted Scion if you didn't do that at the beginning, head over the rope bridge, and you'll find the Dead Maiden you encountered when you began the game. You can now soak the cloth in her blood. No matter which method you use, once you have the bloodied cloth, you can return to Vare and receive the Bloody Finger. Speak to him again, and you'll receive a Pure Blood Knight's Medal, which you can use to teleport to Mogwin's palace. Now your final step to access the DLC is to simply defeat Mohg, Lord of Blood, which can actually be really, really tough.
Is mine and mine alone.
We recommend being well over level 100 for this fight, but thankfully, now that you're here, there's another leveling exploit you can take advantage of if you have a bow and a few arrows. We detail this exploit more in our leveling video, but from this side of grace, shoot the giant bird through the branches to make it run off the cliff, and grant you about 11,000 runes. Rinse and repeat. For the Moog fight, make sure you're equipping armor or using items to increase bleed resistance, dodging through his blood attacks to avoid taking damage, and striking back after his overhead slam and thrust attacks. He has massive range on his melee attacks, so you'll need to learn their weird timing, as he usually hesitates before the swing. There's a lot more to this battle, including a second phase, and an item you can pick up in the subterranean shunning ground that will stun him for easy damage, but we have a full tutorial for the battle if you're having trouble and want to check our video guide on YouTube. Once Shadow of the Erdtree is out, and you're through Mohgwyn's palace and you've defeated Mohg, touching the arm sticking out of the cocoon behind him will teleport you to the starting point of Shadow of the Erdtree. See? That wasn't so bad. Just, several cross-continent trips and some crazy difficult boss fights. But it's not like you were trying to access FromSoft endgame content to have an easy time, right? So, par for the course.
Teamwork makes the dream work, and if you're hoping to take down every nightmare that's in store for you in Shadow of the Erdtree, then it's probably best to not go alone. Coming up next is our breakdown on what we think is the best Spirit Ash to bring along with you to the realm of Shadow, and how to get them. Because like a wise man once said, there's no I in team, but there are a few in Mimic tier. Alright, wake up, Tarnished. The lands between of Elden Ring aren't going to save themselves. But if you are going to live long enough to make a difference, you might need some help. That's where Spirit Ashes come in. These allow you to summon spectral creatures and allies to fight at your side. But what's the best one? For a long time, the answer was Mimic tier. But is that still the case? We will answer that and how to get the best summon in this guide. The Mimic tier is unique among Spirit Ashes for a couple of reasons. First, it doesn't consume FP. Instead, it drains a large chunk of your health, which you can restore with a sip from your flask of Crimson Tears. Second, precisely what it summons isn't set in stone. That's because it creates an exact copy of your character, including equipped weapons to fight by your side. It won't change equipment after being summoned either, so you can even do things like set it up to be a long-range support spellcaster while you switch to melee or an aggro-drawing, heavy shielded tank. The Mimic tier Ashes can be found in Nokron Eternal City, which opens up after your fight with Radahn. Look for the floating rocks over a crater near the Fort Height site of Grace in East Limgrave, near the border to Caelid. Once there, use your trusty steed Torrent to help carefully jump from floating rock to floating rock until you reach an entrance to this structure. Jump down a few stories and you will reach the rooftops of Nokron. From there, follow this path. Once you reach the Nokron Eternal City site of Grace, continue out into the courtyard and keep right between these buildings to find this path leading to a fog gate and a boss fight. After you've won this fight, proceed forward across the bridge and keep on this route until you reach the Ancestral Woods site of Grace. Jump off the cliff onto the building ledges and work your way to the Knight's Sacred Ground. Continue on, climbing across collapsed sections of buildings as you go, until you arrive at this imp statue. Offer a Stone's Word key to pass through the barrier. Take out the baddie on the other side and open the chest to get the Mimic tier Ashes. This will give you one of the most powerful Ashes in Elden Ring, but not quite the best one. That is reserved for a different summon. Black Knife Tish holds the distinction as the most powerful of the Spirit Ashes in Elden Ring. This assassin is fast, capable of dealing out rapid damage with her dagger while dodging to avoid incoming damage, and she's good at holding enemies' attention. She also temporarily reduces the size of the enemy's health bar with her Destined Death ability. The reduction is a fixed percentage of the target's total health, so enemies with particularly large pools of health, like bosses, are great to let Tish put her skills to work. In order to unlock Black Knife Tish, you will need to work your way to the southwest portion of Lernia of the Lakes. Atop these plateaus is the Ringleader's Everjail. To reach this, you will need to defeat Astel, Natural Born of the Void, and open a door using the Dark Moon Ring. These are part of the Ronnie the Witch questline, so be sure to check out our full walkthrough on IGN for that. The door leads to a lift which brings you to the top of the plateau. From here, go north to the Moonlight Altar Site of Grace, then continue northwest to this precipice on the plateau. This is where you find the Ringleader's Everjail. Head inside and give Electo, Black Knife Ringleader, a proper thrashing. This is a tough fight. Your best bet is to avoid Electo until she does one of her ground slam attacks, and then hit her during the recovery from it. If she gives you trouble, refer to our step-by-step boss guide on our wiki on IGN.com. Once she falls, you will be awarded the ashes to summon the Black Knight Tish, and she will only be too happy to murder anyone who stands in her way. Okay, so by this point, you're just about ready to dive into the realm of Shadow and begin the next chapter in the Elden Ring saga. But what if you actually never defeated Mohg and Radahn? Well, you're in luck because we've recruited the help of speedrunner Hazeblade to show you how to stomp out both bosses and get you one step closer to Erdtree.
Shadow of the Erdtree is right around the corner, and if you're keen to get into the expansion but are feeling stuck with defeating the bosses required to enter the Land of Shadow, then this is the video for you. My name is Hazeblade, I'm an Elden Ring speedrunner, and if you watch until the end, I'll show how you can destroy Mohg and Radahn and enter the Elden Ring expansion right away on June 21st. To quickly dispatch Mohg and Radahn, we're going to want a high output build that will allow us to skip through the phases of each boss. For this video, I've chosen a Comet Azure build, which when used properly, can absolutely annihilate most bosses with little to no effort whatsoever. But before we begin melting bosses with it, we need to get a quick understanding of how it works and how to overcome its many caveats. First and foremost, to even cast it at all, we need 60 intelligence, which pretty much removes it as a viable spell in the early game despite how easy it is to get. Second, the cast time is unusually long as it's considered a channeled spell, which of course leaves us vulnerable to incoming attacks while we wind up and then proceed to channel it. Then if we do manage to cast it, it will absolutely destroy our FP bar. Now that we understand what it is and how it works, we're going to overcome those barriers with a specially tailored setup so that we can easily defeat both bosses even at a relatively low level. To set up the build for Radahn, we'll need to be somewhere around level 30 to 45 depending on starting class so we can achieve the following stats. Now don't worry about Vigor for this build, we'll get hit once during the fight, but even without armor and at the lowest amount of Vigor possible, we'll survive. These stats, however, will allow us to wield a weapon called the Sword of Night and Flame, which boasts not one, but 2 Ashes of War, and Comet Azure is one of them. The Ash of War variant actually solves all the issues that the spell itself presents. The weapon can be wielded at a much lower level, and while the Ash doesn't deal quite as much damage and has a fixed duration, we won't have much trouble with it since Radahn is only a mid-game boss. Feel free to level as much as you want beforehand if you decide to take extra Vigor, but again, I recommend you be between level 30 and 45 depending on your starting class. Once you're there, or at a level that you're comfortable with, you'll need to go out and get the following items. For our weapons, we'll use the Sword of Night and Flame at +7. Sonaf is located inside a building in the Caria Manor accessible from the ramparts. You can get the stones to reach +4 from EG, and the rest of the stones for +7 from Altus Plateau, Volcano Manor, or Leandel if you have 2 great runes already. We'll want the Finger Seal, which can be purchased from the Twin Maiden Husks in the Round Table Hold for 800 runes, and for our talismans, we'll prioritize the Ritual Sword Talisman, which you can find in a chest at the Lux Ruins in Altus Plateau, after defeating Demi-Human Queen Gilka. We'll grab the Graven School Talisman found behind an illusory wall in the Academy of Raya Lucaria just before the Debate Parlor, and we'll also want the Blue Dancer Charm, which you'll get by defeating the Guardian Golem at the High Road Cave in Limgrave. And finally, we'll get the Magic Scorpion Charm, which is obtained by giving Celavis the Amber Starlight as a part of his questline. If you're locked out of the quest to obtain this talisman, you can kill Alexander for the Warrior Jar Shard, or grab any other talisman that gives you extra stats or damage and stack it with Godric's Great Rune. For our flasks, we'll want at least 1 flask allocated to the Flask of Cerulean Tears, and inside of our Physic Flask, we're going to want the Cerulean Hidden Tear and the Magic Shrouding Crack Tear. You can get the Cerulean Hidden Tear from the Ulcerated Tree Spirit guarding the Minor Erdtree in Mount Gelmir, and the Magic Shrouding Crack Tear from the Erdtree Avatar near the Minor Erdtree in northeastern Liurnia. The only actual spell we need for Radahn is Golden Vow, which can be found at the Corpse Stench Shack at the end of the path near the Broken Bridge to Mount Gelmir. And as for additional items which are totally optional, we can get Godric's Great Rune, which is recommended if you don't have the Magic Scorpion Charm. Of course, you'll also want some Rune Arcs to go with that. You can also grab the Spellblade set, which you can actually get from Roger early by enlisting with Ronnie. We do this anyway for the Magic Scorpion Charm, so it should be fairly convenient, but keep in mind, we can do this fight without armor. The Spellblade set boosts sorceries if you want to have armor on, but just remember that by adding Equip Load, we reduce the efficacy of the Blue Dancer Charm. So all this really does is offset some of the damage we're losing and gives us a small amount of armor. And finally, you'll want some larval tears, at least 3 if you're changing builds for this guide. Once you've collected these items, head over to Radahn's fortress in southeastern Caelid, get naked, and prepare for battle. Before entering the teleporter, cast Golden Vow and two-hand the Sword of Night and Flame. Immediately after entering, mount up on Torrent while moving directly away from Radahn and keep dashing until he despawns. If done quickly enough, the gravity arrow he's trying to shoot will also despawn. From here, it's safe to approach him. Radahn should fire an arrow out into oblivion, put away his bow, and switch to his Starscourge greatswords. While approaching him, drink a Cerulean Flask, and after reaching the open area past the summons, strafe on Torrent until Radahn performs this attack. When he uncrosses his arms, move directly towards him, and once he lunges, perform a dismount strong attack, immediately followed by a Comet Azure. Get close to him and between his legs while he picks up his swords, and as soon as he lifts his leg, cast another Comet Azure. He'll start phasing now, which is our cue to strafe left around his legs until he bangs the hilts of his swords together. Once this happens, drink the Physic Flask and immediately follow up with another Comet Azure. If timed correctly, he should pull us in with his gravity spell as soon as ours ends. Now when he does this, it can go one of 2 ways depending on how we're positioned. If we stay close to him after he pulls us in, he'll follow up with the Slam, which can be avoided by getting behind him and performing a Comet Azure, which should have built enough stagger on him by now to break his posture. Simply follow up once more with Comet Azure, and he's dead. The other thing that can happen is if we're not close enough after he pulls us in, he won't follow up with the Slam, and he'll run away and go ride a Comet of his own and try to kill us. If that happens, don't worry. We can carefully reinsert ourselves next to him as he lands and finish him off while he's trying to summon his pet rocks. And that's it. We've bested Radahn and are well on our way to entering the Land of Shadow. But we still have one more boss to kill. Preparing for Mohg isn't nearly as involved as Radahn since we'll be using most of the items from earlier in the setup, but we will need to gather a few things to round out the build. For starters, we'll need to be high enough level to push all the way to 60 intelligence, which is level 50 to 61 depending on starting class, before we acquire the following items. At this point, we will need 2 Great Runes for the Shackle, but since we've defeated Radahn, we already have one of them. We'll be using the actual Comet Azure spell for this one, which can be found by interacting with Primeval Sorcerer Azure past the Hermit Village in Mount Gelmir. We'll also want Mohg's Shackle, which you can get in Leyndell Underground in the Subterranean Shunning Grounds. And for our weapon, we'll want Lusat's Glintstone Staff, which can be found in a chest after defeating the Nox Duo in Celia Town of Sorcery in Caelid, and should be upgraded to +9. If you've already defeated Morgott in your playthrough, you'll have a lot more options as far as getting your Somber Smithing Stones 8 and 9, but if you haven't defeated Morgott yet, you can get them from the Dragon Barrow in Caelid. We'll also need one more spell for this build, which is Terra Magica. You can find that after defeating the Crystallian bosses at the end of Academy Crystal Cave and taking the elevator up to Raya Lucaria Academy. We'll be using the same talismans as before, but if you have the Graven Mass talisman from the Consecrated Snowfield, you can use that instead of the Graven School talisman or the Magic Scorpion charm if you were locked out of the quest to obtain it. We'll also use the same tiers in the Physic Flask, of course, and don't forget to memorize the spells that we just got. You'll need 4 total memory slots for these spells, and since we start with 2 and we're already doing Sullivan's quest for the Magic Scorpion charm, we can get the one in his tower for free, and we can also buy one at the Round Table Hold for 3,000 runes. If you'd rather use those runes for something else though, feel free to get the memory stones from any of the towers or by defeating the Red Wolf of Radigan in the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Just like Radahn, we can do this fight naked, so once you've got your build ready, 2-hand your staff and enter the boss arena. Now, if you haven't triggered this boss before, I highly recommend you quit out after triggering him the first time so you can start further away. After entering the Fog Gate, take roughly 15 steps forward and cast Terra Magica and immediately follow up with Mohg's Shackle. While he's down, drink the Physic Flask and start channeling Comet Azure. From there, all you need to do is continue channeling the spell and watch Mohg's health rapidly deplete while he mindlessly counts down his death in Latin.
I can see it as clear as day. The coming of our dynasty. Morgwin.
Are you having a hard time deciding what gear set you want to take with you into the realm of Shadow? Or maybe you're just bored of your current loadout and want to try something new? Then stick around, because in just a moment we're going to dive into 7 of our favorite gear sets that will have you ready for just about anything in Shadow of the Erdtree.
Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree expansion will soon take root, and if you are looking for a sturdy build to carry your Tarnished through the Shadowlands, we've got you covered. We've put together 7 practical builds based on what we're expecting to encounter in the DLC, one for each of the Great Runes. As stated, most of these builds are based on what we've gleaned from the trailer and already had confirmed by From Software. What you won't find on this list are some of our previous build guides, including PvP, Mage, and Bleed. You'll find links to all of those in the video description, in case you want even more suggestions for how to build your character. The ones in this video will be fun and practical, with a little bit of fashion souls sprinkled in for good measure. We've also thrown in a few meta builds from the community, for those looking to min-max with certain weapons or spells. So whether you're a mage or a melee fighter, there's something for you. This first build works for both types, because it's all about your armor and accessories. Right after saying that the sky is blue, director Hidetaka Miyazaki confirmed that Shadow of the Erdtree will have a poison area, so you need to be prepared. The best armor for that area would be the Mushroom set, which has a massive immunity boost of 243. You can find it inside Seethwater Cave on Mount Gelmir, after you've opened the dungeon with 2 Stone Sword keys. Once you drop down the poison waterfall, hang left to make your way into the upper part of the room you just exited. Follow the ledge until you can make a right, and you'll find a chamber with several mushroom people praying to one of those giant flowers. The armor set is on a body next to it. The Spiral Horn shield confers a similar boost to your immunity. You'll find it on a body immediately south of the Mausoleum's Lake in eastern Liurnia of the lakes. We've marked it on the map right here. For further boosts, you can use talismans, like the Immunizing Horn Charm. Follow the river that runs due south from Noxtella Eternal City, and you'll find it in a giant ant nest. The modeled necklace has the same effect, and since both variants are actually found in related places, we'll show you where to get the +1 version. It's on top of the Hollowhorn grounds in Nokron Eternal City. These areas are accessible during Ranni the Witch's questline, which is simply too involved to include in this video. To get started, you'll have to clear Caria Manor and speak to Ranni at her tower behind the estate. This game-spanning quest actually leads to one of the main endings. We have a full walkthrough for the rest of it on our wiki, so hit the link in the description for all the info on that. There are also 3 easily accessible spells that will keep the poison from harming you too much. Cure Poison is the obvious one, and Brother Corrin sells it at Roundtable Hold. If you give him the Two Fingers Prayer Book, he'll also sell Lord's Aid, which has the same effect. To get the prayer book, head to the Fortified Manor in Lanedale Royal Capital. From the first floor site of Grace, go to the door on the opposite corner of the main hall. Take a right and head straight to the end of the passage to find the book on a corpse in front of the fireplace. Finally, you can use Flame Cleanse Me to deal a little bit of burn damage to yourself in order to cure poison or scarlet rot. You'll find this spell on a body at the Fire Monk camp just southeast of the Church of Vows in Liurnia. Speaking of fire, it's the most common elemental damage type in the base game, and both Messmer and this giant Wicker Man looking boss from the DLC trailer make it clear that the Shadowlands will be no different. You'll need to be able to take the heat, and the greatest fire resistance comes from the Fire Prelate set. It'll take some grinding to get the full thing, but every part is dropped as potential loot from the Fire Prelates. They're found in several places in the lands between, but the first spot you'll probably encounter them is Fort Lathe, at the western edge of Mount Gelmir. If you want a fire-resistant shield, you can't do much better than the Visage Shield. There's an underground section of the Caelem Ruins here, and you'll find 2 mad pumpkin heads down there. Take them out and you can grab the shield they were guarding. That armor and shield are quite heavy, so for the lighter builds, there are other options. One of the best is the Flame Drake Talisman, and you'll get the +2 version as the prize in one of the game's many dungeons. Beat the Beastmen of Farum Azula at the end of Dragon Barrow Cave in Caelid to claim it. Casters, meanwhile, have the perfect incantation at their disposal for fire resistance. It's called Flame Fortification, and as the name implies, it buffs your fire resistance by a huge 35% for a limited time. Buy it from Brother Corin at Roundtable Hold. For melee fighters looking to utilize fire damage for themselves, the Blasphemous Blade is a great choice. Reddit user Geralt of Tsushima has a nice breakdown of their recommended gear, which will help you, quote, melt everything and recover HP while doing it. First things first, you'll need to beat Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, to receive his remembrance. That can be traded with Enya for the Blasphemous Blade, a unique weapon with fire infusion that restores health with every enemy you defeat. Equip Rykard's Great Rune to increase the effect. You can also use its Taker's Flame ability to restore health as you deal more fire damage. To take this even further, pair it with the Erdtree seal in your other hand. Head to street level from the prison town site of Grace in Volcano Manor. There's a dungeon entrance right by the burning pile of bodies and the Omen Killer. You'll find the seal on a body inside. You'll want to cast Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength to increase your attack and defense with the former, and buff your fire attack specifically with the latter. Golden Vow is on a body inside the Corpse Stench Shack in Mount Gelmir, and Flame Grant Me Strength is found between two fire chariots behind Fort Gale and Caelid. As for talismans, you can raise your fire damage even more with the Fire Scorpion Charm, found on the ramparts of Fort Lathe. Jump over to the small wooden balcony once you reach the roof. To boost your physical attack, you can use the Shard of Alexander. That's your reward for finishing Alexander the Iron Fist questline, which you can start by finding him stuck in the ground at this spot near the River Canyon in northern Limgrave. Knock him free, then follow the link in the video description for the remaining steps of this quest. Also hit the link for Blythe's questline, because this other talisman is part of that. You'll hear some strange howling near the Mistwood Ruins in Limgrave, and once you do, you can return to Merchant Calais at the Church of Ella to learn the finger snap gesture. Use it to call down Blythe from his perch. You'll then be sent to fight Bloodhound Knight Darwill, who's found inside the Everjail here. Once you beat him, you can purchase the Carrion Filigreed crest from Blacksmith Iji in Liurnia. That talisman lowers the magic cost of all spells, like the two we just recommended. Finally, you can boost this build even further with the right Wondrous Physic mix. Head to the Minor Erdtree in the Mistwood to find the spiked cracked tear on an altar nearby. Then, beat the Putrid Avatar at the Minor Erdtree near the Smoldering Church in Caelid for the Flame Shrouding cracked tear. These will enhance your charged attacks and fire damage respectively. On the other side of the coin is ice damage, and any casters looking to cool the flames of Mesmer can do so with a Frost Mage build. Reddit user Thovit has a solid setup that couples ice spells with a bit of melee. One of their go-to spells is Adula's Moonblade, a powerful late-game sorcery that slashes forward and fires off a blast of cold air. You have to defeat Glintstone Dragon Adula to get it, and she'll fly away from the Three Sisters to the Cathedral of Manus Celis after your first battle with her. To get there, you'll have to complete Ronnie the Witch's questline, as linked earlier in this video. Carrion Slicer is a similar spell, slashing forward with a magical blade. You can buy it from Muriel, Selen, or Celavis after handing over the Royal House Scroll. To get that, head to this enemy camp in southeastern Limgrave. There's a body by the sorcerer on the ledge that's holding the scroll. The Carrion Glintstone Staff will boost the effect of both of those spells, so you'll want to make that your casting focus. To get it, enter the Carrion Study Hall in its regular form and follow the stairs to the back of the main chamber. Mind the ghosts. Thovit also recommends either Renala or Ronnie's Dark Moon, both of which invoke the night sky with a moon-shaped blast of magic. You'll get Renala's by trading her remembrance for the spell. For Ronnie's, it's the prize you'll find inside Chilona's Rise near the Cathedral of Manus Celis, meaning it's only reachable after the Witch's quest. Once you're there, you'll need to open the tower by attacking 3 spirit turtles around the area. We've marked them for you here, but you can consult our wiki for more info if you need it. To complete the theme, you can wear Ronnie's Snow Witch set, which will increase the cold damage of those spells. Ronnie's quest will also let you inside Rena's Rise about halfway through, and the robes and hat are found in a chest inside. Finally, you can use the Radagon icon to make all of your spellcasting go quicker. To get it, start from the Debate Hall site of Grace inside Raya Lucaria Academy. That's the Red Wolf boss room. Head north, then make a full U-turn outside and follow the railing. Hop over it and climb the ladder in front of you to reach a broken window, Follow the balcony on the other side to find the talisman. Mesmer is called the Impaler, and that definitely sounds like pierce damage to us. To prepare for his impaling attacks, you'll need a sturdy set of armor. Lionel's set has the highest pierce reduction in the game, as well as a high poise value to prevent you from being staggered. You can get Lionel's set in Lanedale Royal Capital. Head to the Lower Capital Church site of Grace and look to the body in the bed in the same room. Search it to find the complete set. To further boost your defense, you can take your pick of any talisman with a defense bonus, really, but there's one we would recommend. The Blue Feathered Branch Sword cuts the damage you take in half when you're below 20%. Beat the Deathbird east of the War Master's Shack in Stormhill to get it. Now back to dealing lots of damage, and restoring your health too. One of the more recent meta builds to emerge uses Great Stars, a spiked Great Hammer that restores 1% of your HP with every hit. You'll find it in Altus Plateau, along the road that runs west from the Road of Iniquity side path site of Grace. Look for a well-guarded traveling carriage pulled by 2 trolls. If you can fight your way to the chest, you'll find this weapon inside. Reddit user Milk I Guess has some recommendations. Start with the Wild Strike's Ash of War, which you almost certainly already have. It's dropped by a teardrop scarab leading up the hill to the fight with Margit the Fell Omen. Now you're going to equip 2 talismans, the Assassin's Crimson Dagger and the Taker's Cameo. The former can be found in the Death Touch Catacombs in Northern Limgrave. It's dropped by the Black Knife Assassin boss inside. The latter is awarded as part of Tanith's questline, which you can start upon meeting her at Volcano Manor. The quest involves assassinating 3 targets for her faction, and we'll direct you to our full walkthrough for all the details on those, if you follow the link in the description. With all this, you can use Wild Strikes to quickly build up Great Star's bleed effect, then use your jumping attack for massive damage. With those 2 talismans, you'll restore extra health on every critical hit and on every enemy defeated. Finally, we have one for the Fashion Souls players, an Erdtree themed build. It's in the name of the DLC after all. If we're going to be in the shadow of the Erdtree, then we might as well represent it. You can start with the Tree Sentinel set, found inside the Ariza hero's grave. To get it requires you to destroy 3 chariots inside, which means following a specific path. Our wiki has the exact details so that you don't miss a step. Just hit the link in the description. And the final link is for the Fringefolk hero's grave, in which you'll find the Erdtree's favor. You'll find it in a hidden lower section of the Fringefolk hero's grave, if you drop off this spot at the second chariot ramp and make a U-turn. Melee fighters can also grab the tree spear in a carriage at the southern tip of the Broken Liurnia Highway Bridge, and they can get an Erdsteel dagger from Kenneth Height after clearing out Fort Height on the eastern edge of Limgrave. He's found along the road to the Mistwood. Need a shield? Take out the 2 tree sentinels at the grand entrance to the capital along the southwestern portion of the city wall. You'll get the Erdtree Great Shield for doing so. If you want a bow, you can get the Erdtree bow in the city itself. Start from the Erdtree Sanctuary site of Grace and climb the route outside the eastern door to reach the 2nd floor. Head back outside through the next door, jump to the roof to the west, then jump through the broken window to find the chest containing the bow. There's some great Erdtree inspired magic for the casters out there too. We've already told you where to get the Erdtree Seal and Golden Vow incantations earlier in this video, and you can find Blessing of the Erdtree right next to the Queen's Bedchamber site of Grace in the capital. That's a great spell for regenerating your health for a full minute and a half. And with that, we've given you some recommended builds for Shadow of the Erdtree. Some are practical, some are more meta, and some are just plain fun.
What's a Souls-like game without a giant sword? Up next is our Great Sword build guide that'll help you smash your way through any obstacle in your way, and more importantly, let you unleash your inner guts or Cloud Strife fantasy, just minus all the sadness. Check it out.
When it comes to building your character in Elden Ring, there are many combinations of swords, spells, armor, and all other types of gear to make your tarnish stand out from the crowd. For those who like to swing big heavy blades to feel like Guts or Cloud Strife, there's the great option of a Great Sword build. You might have even heard it called an Unga Bunga build by the Elden Ring community. By the late game, you'll be able to swing oversized swords with one hand and crush your enemies with stagger-inducing charge attacks. This guide will show you how to get there. To swing a great sword requires a balance of strength and dexterity, so your best bets for a starting class are the hero, warrior, vagabond, or samurai. Focus on strength and dexterity as you level up, but there are some other stats to keep in mind as well. For one, you're gonna need a lot of HP via the vigor stat, as well as high endurance to increase your stamina and carrying capacity. Great swords are heavy. Even when you reach endgame status, you'll still be swinging your weapon much slower than a lot of your foes. That means you'll need to be able to take a good amount of damage, so heavy armor is also key. The trade-off is that great swords are excellent for staggering your enemies, letting you follow up with a devastating critical hit. Charging up your weapon for an especially strong swing takes extra time, but you can't argue with the results. Let's talk about some specific swords now. Getting your hands on a great sword can be done as soon as you start your adventure in Limgrave. It's just a few steps southeast of the Gatefront Site of Grace. Take out the soldier guarding the carriage, then open the chest for the weapon. Another early game greatsword is the Claymore, found in Castle Morn on the Weeping Peninsula at the southernmost point of the map. Starting from the main courtyard with the pile of burning bodies, head to the top of the pyre. Head past the next wall and turn right, entering the building marked by the torch. The Claymore is in a chest directly on the left inside. Getting into the mid-game, you can obtain the Maris Executioner's Sword at the Shaded Castle in Altus Plateau. Progress through the dungeon until you reach its boss, Elimer of the Briar, and defeat him to win the sword for yourself. Another option is the Blasphemous Blade, which adds fire damage to your attacks. This special weapon is what you might call a boss soul weapon, meaning it's crafted from the remembrance of the Blasphemous, which you'll receive upon defeating the demigod Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. Once you've done that, take this remembrance to Enya and Roundtable Hold to craft the sword. We can't do a greatsword build without mentioning the most famous blade across all From Software games, the Dark Moon Greatsword. However, this weapon can only be obtained at the end of Ranni the Witch's questline, which is far too involved for this video. To get started, you'll have to clear Caria Manor and speak to Ranni at her tower behind the estate. This game-spanning quest actually leads to one of the main endings. We have a full walkthrough for the rest of it on our wiki, so hit the link in the description for all the info on that. Now, let's say you want an even bigger blade than the ones you've been carrying so far. In that case, you might want to consider working your way toward a colossal sword. These are almost comically large, dealing high physical damage at the cost of even more speed. They can't be infused with Ashes of War in most cases either, so they're definitely not for everybody. Even so, a solid colossal sword could carry you through the entirety of the game as you grow into it, so there are some big payoffs. Just note that they all have very high stat requirements to wield properly. One of the first ones you can come across is the Grafted Blade Greatsword, which is directly inspired by the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones, lest we forget that George R.R. Martin teamed up with From Software to write the Elden Ring lore. You might not ever get your hands on the Winds of Winter, but you can get this greatsword in Castle Morn, the same place you found the Claymore. Beat the Leonin Misbegotten at the end of the dungeon, and it'll drop it. The greatsword is not to be confused with all the greatswords lowercase g we talked about earlier, because it's actually a colossal sword, despite having the same name as an entire weapon category. Thanks, Miyazaki. Follow the road northwest from the Caelem Ruins Site of Grace in Caelid to find a carriage guarded by giant dogs. Defeat them to get the weapon inside. Also found in Caelid is the Godslayer's Greatsword. To get it, you'll need to head to the region's Divine Tower, make your way inside, and all the way down to the lowest level. Here you'll face a Godskin Apostle. After the fight, you'll find this greatsword in a chest behind the boss room. Our last recommendation is the Star Scourge Greatsword, and as you might have guessed, it is made with another remembrance. Specifically, you'll have to beat General Radahn, then take his remembrance to Enya to fuse the weapon. It matches Radahn's own paired swords, meaning it's actually a 2-for-1 deal. It also has the Starcaller Cry ability, which hits enemies with powerful gravity magic. We've talked a lot about swords, but we should also take a moment to mention shields. The constant question of a greatsword build is whether or not to use one. Two-handing any weapon increases your strength by a full 50%. For example, the Grafted Blade Greatsword has a hefty requirement of 40 strength to even wield it at all. If you have at least 27, you can use both hands and effectively use it. So a shield is really up to you. In many cases, it might be best to two-hand the weapon until you're able to hold it with just one, then switch back to a sword and shield loadout. If you get really comfortable with dodging, then you can keep both hands on the blade. Just be sure to keep an eye on your equip load. If it spills over into heavy load territory, you're not going to be able to roll at all. Of course, armor also adds a lot to your total load, especially since you're going to want some pretty heavy pieces. The top recommendation is the Bull Goat set, which is the heaviest in the game. The trade-off is the highest physical defense as well as the most poise, which is an invisible stat that governs when you and your opponent's stance breaks. The Bull Goat set is granted during the Patches questline, which you can start upon speaking to him inside Volcano Manor, provided you spared him if you happen to fight him earlier in the game. Much like with Ronnie, we'll defer you to our wiki via the link in the description for more information if you need it. One alternative is the Tree Sentinel set, which is found in the Oriza hero's grave in the Altus Plateau. To get it requires you to destroy 3 chariots inside, which means following a specific path. Our wiki has the exact details so that you don't miss a step. Just hit the link in the description. Once you've got your armor picked out, you can accessorize with some talismans. The first one we'd recommend is the Bull Goat's talisman, which matches that armor set from earlier. It's inside the Dragon Barrow cave in Caelid. Past the patrolling rune bear is a cavern full of animals, and you'll find this on the nearby body. Equip it to increase your poise. Head to the Bestial Sanctum in Caelid, and you can find the Dragon Crest Seal Talisman, which reduces physical damage taken. Carefully drop down the roots and rooftops on the northwestern side of the building to find it on the lowest level. If you need to increase your equip load, then we'd recommend the Arsenal Charm. The base version is missable, but you can always find the +1 in the Altus Tunnel dungeon. From the main room with the workers, take a right to find a vertical chamber with one of those rock-spitting space flies. You'll need to avoid that attack, hop on the tree branch, and follow it to the platform above to find the charm. Finally, there's the Erdtree's Favor, a good talisman for basically any build in the game, since it increases your HP, stamina, and equip load. You'll find it in a hidden lower section of the Fringefolk hero's grave, if you drop off this spot at the second chariot ramp and make a U-turn. If you're using a greatsword or colossal sword that allows for Ashes of War, we have a few of those to recommend as well. The first is Bloody Slash, which adds a nasty blood splatter and some extra arcane damage to your attacks. It's dropped by the Knight Commander at Fort Height, found along the eastern coast of Limgrave. The commander is up on the ramparts. Another good Ash of War is Flaming Strike, which, as you can imagine, coats your blade in fire. It's found at Radahn's Redmane Castle in Caelid, carried by the Teardrop Scarab in the graveyard behind the castle itself, further south. Once you get back there, you can chop it down to earn this ash. If you want to deal lightning damage, then Thunderbolt is a good choice. You'll find it in the Royal Capital. Starting from the Avenue Balcony site of Grace, head downstairs and outside. Make a left and follow the railing, and you'll see another Teardrop Scarab down at street level. Beat it to get this Ash of War and give your enemies a nice shock. Finally, there are a good number of wondrous physic options for your greatsword build, depending on which aspects you want to focus on. To temporarily increase your strength, use the Strength Knot Crystal Tier. It's almost directly northeast of the Stormhill Shack site of Grace. Head that direction to find it sitting in a stone bowl near a troll. To buff your dexterity, use the Dexterity Knot Crystal Tier. This one's on an island in Liurnia of the Lakes. We've marked it here on the map for you. The next 3 tiers are dropped by field bosses, and you can actually get 2 of them from the same foe. Head to the Minor Erdtree and Dragon Barrow in Caelid to find one of those gnarly putrid avatars. Beat it, and it'll drop the Opaline hard tier and the Stone Barb hard tier. The first increases your damage negation for a limited time, and the second makes it easier to break an enemy's stance. Both are great options for keeping yourself healthy and knocking others down. Next up is the Leaden hard tier, which prevents you from being staggered yourself. To get that, you'll have to beat the Ulcerated Tree Spirit in Mount Gelmir. It's guarding the Minor Erdtree there. Finally, you can increase your maximum equip load for a limited time with the Winged Crystal tier. It's in the capital outskirts, along the wall to the north. Don't mind the snails. But do keep in mind all these tips for your greatsword build. This guide has covered all the recommended weapons, armor, and accessories to make this melee build the best it can be.
There's a ton of different build combinations available in Elden Ring, and while experimentation and the trial and error of finding out that right build is half the fun, sometimes it's worth just taking a leap of faith and diving headfirst into a single build. Up next is a comprehensive guide on an incredibly powerful and versatile build that is completely built on, well, faith. Let's check it out.
When you start your journey through the lands between, you'll have many questions about finding the perfect build. From colossal swords to magic beams and more, it could seem like an endless number of possibilities. One great option is Faith, which may very well be the most versatile build type in all of Elden Ring. Whether you want to run a full pyro build like you did in the days of Dark Souls, or take down bosses in a single strike of red lightning, Faith has plenty of great options to choose from. With 3 elemental damage types and some of the best buffs in the game, you'll have a seemingly endless damage ceiling. And we're going to be showcasing mid-game builds. We're also going to showcase late-game builds, and we're going to show you how to get strong early too. This is Matt with IGN, and this is the IGN Faith Build Guide to help you through Elden Ring. To make a great Faith build, you'll need a starting class with the right stats. The 2 best options are Prophet and Confessor. If you're planning on running incantations only, the Prophet is a great choice that starts with high faith. And if on the other end of that you decide that you want to use weapons throughout the lands between that are faith-based, the Confessor class may be a better option, which starts with some strength and dexterity as well as 14 faith too. They are both great options. The playstyle of Faith as a whole has you focusing on faith, mind, vigor, and endurance. That's because you want to have enough endurance and, generally speaking, around a medium roll. You could even go with a light roll as a caster. You want enough mind not to have to fill your FP flask too often. And of course, you want faith for damage and vigor so you could take hits. First thing is, we're going to start from the very beginning. For the purpose of this video, I picked the Confessor class, but you can't go wrong with either the Confessor or the Prophet class. We're going to move on to the beginner's guide and continue on from there to create a very powerful faith build. And the first place we're going to be heading is from Gate Front, which is literally just northeast of where you start. We're going to be heading to the ravine in Aguil Lake because we want to meet Patches, who can become a merchant, and we want to buy a gold pickle foul foot from him. After you get him to surrender at about half HP, he's the boss inside the cave that we're looking at right here. You can go back and buy a gold pickled foul foot. In the back of the room, by the way, there is a transporter trap chest. Take that chest and follow me directly. We're going to be heading north towards the Third Church of America, and this is going to be the area where we can grab the Wondrous Physic, which is going to help us substantially on our journey. Right there on the map is where we're going to be heading, and we're going to grab the Wondrous Physic. Now, don't forget to grab the Sacred Tear here and to check churches for Sacred Tears. They upgrade how much your flask can heal you and how much FP you get back from your FP flask too, so it's really helpful to grab those, and a lot of the churches in the game do have Sacred Tears. Follow the Spirit Springs in the back of the church. We're going to be heading to the red area on the map. In this red area is the wonderful location that is Caelid, which is a high-level area, but it does have a dragon out there that we can farm for some serious runes. Rest at Rotview Balcony and head back towards the Round Table Hold. If you started as the Confessor like myself, be sure to buy Catch Flame. If you started as the Prophet, you already have Catch Flame. This is a good incantation for us. After this, we're going to be heading to the Weeping Peninsula to grab 2 very useful items. First thing that we need to grab is the Morning Star in a carriage nearby. If you go straight once you're into the Weeping Peninsula, you could easily see the carriage here. Grab the Morning Star because we're going to need a bleed weapon. This is going to help us substantially with our farm. The next item we're going to need right here on the map is the Faith Tear. This can go in the Wondrous Physic, and this will give you 10 levels of faith for 3 minutes. This is extremely helpful early on and can make us more powerful right away. Next up, we're going to be heading back to Rotview Balcony and going to the right where there's a fort. This fort has the incantation Flame Grant Me Strength. Flame Grant Me Strength will give you 20% more physical damage and 20% more fire damage for 30 seconds. It's a great buff and incantation for us to grab. It's in between the carriages around the left side of the fort. And after we safely grab this incantation, we're going to be heading back and we're going to be going towards Dragon Barrow, which is in the northeastern section of Caelid. This is a section of the map that has the big dragon we can kill, which will give us 96,000 runes. You're going to be moving on forward through Dragon Barrow until you reach the big dragon, because we want to get behind the big dragon. We want to grab that Site of Grace, and then of course we want to be able to take him down too with our bleed weapon that we grab. The Morning Star is going to be really helpful for us. After we use the map here, I'm going to show you directly where to go. And there it is by the second Erdtree in Caelid. We're going to take down this big dragon with the Morning Star, and if you use a gold pickled foul foot towards the end of its HP bar, it will net you 96,000 runes in total. This is going to help us ultimately make a really strong early game faith build, which is an important part here because it's going to make the early game a little bit easier for us. And by the time we get to the mid game and late game faith builds in this video, you're going to be surprised with the amount of damage you're getting. So for the beginner's guide here, I am going to show levels a couple times, and I'm going to show them now if you want to follow along, but this is what we hit in terms of our levels. After this, we're going to be going back to Gatefront, and we're going to be moving towards Stormhill Shack, which is north of Gatefront. Now, there's an important NPC here, so be sure to talk to her, because you could end up with the jellyfish summon too. But also importantly, be sure to grab the stone sword key that's here, because we're going to need this later on. And next up, we're going to be grabbing the Golden Vow Ash of War. This is where it's located on the map in Limgrave. You have to take out this knight to grab it. You could throw it on a dagger, and it'll give you an extra buff that stacks with Flame Grant Me Strength, giving you 10% more attack and defense. Next, at the Church of Ella, you can go back here now and talk to Ronnie the Witch, and you can grab the Spirit Calling Bell as well as the Lone Wolf Ashes. This could be really helpful going forward in terms of taking on tough bosses, so be sure to grab these. And next up here on the map, I want to show you where to get smithing stone wands. Early in the game, you could farm the enemies in here as well as on the walls. You can grab smithing stone wands. That'll help you upgrade your materials. Next up, we're going to go to Castle Ward Tunnel, and we're going to get ready with buffs to take on Margit and head into Stormvale Castle. So I want to show you a nice buffing order that you could use, because as you move throughout the game, Faith has some of the best buffs in the game. Make sure you have Catch Flame equipped as well as Flame Grant Me Strength, and make sure you have the Faith tier in the Wondrous Physic. Now for our buffing order, we want to use the longest duration stuff first. So we're going to drink our tier first, then we're going to cast Golden Vow on a dagger, then use Flame Grant Me Strength. Fill up your FP after. And now you're ready to take on Margit, the first boss of Elden Ring, who could be a challenge for most players. For me, the best bet here is to mix in Catch Flame with the straight sword that you started with if you're using the Confessor class, as Square Off does a lot of poise damage. By the way, you can also get Margit's Shackle, which is an item that could stun the boss twice in the first phase from Patches and Murkwater Cave. It's helpful. Here's where we get our powerful early game build, Black Flame. As you move through Stormvale Castle, you'll come across a courtyard full of enemies. Down the set of stairs to the left is a stone sword key door. Be careful of the rats in the area. Behind this door is the best early game seal available in the Godslayer seal. You'll also be able to net yourself the book for Black Flame, where you'll be able to get the simple Black Flame Fireball, which is actually one of the best incantations in the game because it does a good amount of fire damage as well as percentage damage too. Between the 10% damage boost to Godslayer incantations that the seal offers and the fact that it's a very good scaling seal at lower levels, this makes it for a perfect early game Faith build, and we're going to get stronger from here. Back at the Round Table Hold, you could buy Black Flame. Whenever you're ready, be sure to buy the Black Flame Fireball. You could buy Black Flame Blade too, but keep in mind this only lasts 10 seconds, and honestly, it's just okay. The Black Flame Fireball is much better for now. Be sure to equip Black Flame and the Godslayer seal as well before moving on. And then you could test it out on Godric, the second boss in the game. Make sure you have enough FP. I did run out and I ended up close at the end here. He ultimately took one try for me, but I did run out of FP. Overall, make sure you pick up Golden Seeds along the way and Sacred Tears to improve your flask. If you need help with this boss, Nefeli can be talked to not far from actually where you walk into the fog door. If you just turn around and keep going on the left side, you can talk to her and she becomes a summon that can help you with this boss fight. And Godric can be a little bit tough too. I personally find Market to be a little bit more challenging because he's more erratic, but Godric got me down to the wire here and it ended up being a relatively close fight overall. Keep in mind that summons available, and you can also use your Lone Wolf Ashes too. If you want to continue to follow my levels, this is what I chose to do with the runes after Godric. These are the levels as we're moving into the lakes. Shortly here, by the way, we're going to be at the lakes right now. We're going to start moving towards grabbing items for the mid-game. After you've conquered Stormville, you'll end up at a new area called Liurnia of the Lakes. This is a very large area where we'll be grabbing items along the way as we move towards the mid-game, which I consider about the Altlist Plateau. We're going to grab a lot of items that can make us more powerful. Don't forget the Sacred Tear in the church on the way down. And once we get down to the Liurnia of the Lakes, we can really start to work towards making our build more powerful. The first thing here on the map is we're going to grab the Jellyfish Shield. This can increase our damage by 20% when we're using incantations. And that could be a huge bonus for us. That 20% damage increase is huge in the early game, and as we work towards getting 20 strength and 14 dexterity, that's going to be really helpful. Next up, you can grab the Lightning Book in the eastern section by the Artist Shack, which gives us lightning incantations. And you can trade any of this stuff in at Corin at the Round Table Hold, or here on the map at the Pastor Turtle Pope, who never moves, by the way, so he might be the best option to trade your books in, and you can buy stuff like Electrify Armament, Lightning Spear, and Hone Bolt. Next up, we're going to go to the second tree avatar in the Liurnia of the Lakes because they're going to drop the Holy and Lightning tier for us, which is hugely helpful for Faith builds because they increase Lightning and Holy damage by 20%. It can go in your Wondrous Physic. I just wanted to show the whole strat here. I was using Catch Flame on the tree avatar around level 40, 45 or so, and it wasn't too difficult at all because the trees take extra fire damage. All the tree avatars in the game take extra fire damage, which is really helpful when fighting them. You can also use Black Flame Fireball on them too, that's also excellent, but for me I don't mind going up close using Catch Flame, which is really fast and does good fire damage. Right on the map there is where it is by the Mausoleum compound and the second minor Erdtree. The next useful item to make for a powerful Faith build is the incantation Howl of Shabriri. This will give you a 25% generic damage buff, and it is a body buff, much like Flame Grant Me Strength. This is helpful though because it doesn't apply just to physical damage and boost everything in total. You do take extra damage when you're using Howl of Shabriri, so be aware of that. You can't stack it with Flame Grant Me Strength either. There it is on the map there at the Frenzy Flaming Tower. The next good item that you can grab is at the first tree avatar in Caleb. This one's a little bit out of the way. We're going to grab 2 items in Caleb, but this now should be easy to fight. Between Black Flame and Catch Flame, you should be able to take the first tree avatar. It's the easier one, and this will net you the Flame tier, which once again is really helpful because it's part of our 3 elemental damage types, right? We've got the Holy tier now, we've got the Lightning tier, and now we're going to have the Flame tier here in a second. Like the other ones, this will boost fire damage by 20%, one of our great elemental damage types we just talked about. There it is at the minor Erdtree, the first one in Caleb. That's where you can net the Flame tier. And this is more of a when you're ready type of situation because Anastasia is actually relatively difficult at this point in the game. You can beat her though, and there's a Site of Grace right there. At the Smoldering Church, she drops the Sacred Scorpion Charm. Now, before you leave Liurnia of the Lakes, I just want to remind you not to forget to get the first bell bearing so you can upgrade any of your seals that you get along the way, any of the smithing stone seals to +6. This is important to grab, and by the way, you can also use Square Off in just 2 uses to break the Crystalians. After you break them, by the way, you could use whatever you want. You can use Catch Flame, Black Flame, whatever you want to throw in there because they're going to take a substantial amount of damage from there. This is an individual one. There's some of these later in the game that you have to fight 2 or 3. For this one, it's not too bad. Just have to defeat this one to get the bell bearing. As you can see, I eventually switched to Black Flame because it ended up doing a lot of damage to them. Now, we're going to show on the map here where to grab this. This is important to grab this. Do not forget this item before you leave the lakes, as you'll need it to upgrade some of your seals. These are my levels at level 40 for those that are curious. 20 Vigor, 27 Faith is important here, so be sure to level up along the way. If you want more runes as you continue, you can grab the Golden Scarab, which gives you 10% more runes on all of your bosses and enemies at the Abandoned Cave in Caelid. And lastly, when you're ready, take on the Rhea Lucaria dungeon. It's a second dungeon in the game, and honestly, Renala is not that difficult of a boss. If you use Square Off, you can break her very frequently, and you can also use Black Flame from a distance for solid damage and to take her down quickly. Now there's two ways out of the lakes. You could use the Grand Lift of Dectus and grab both pieces at Fort Ferrith and Fort Height, or you could go up the ravine here through the Ravine-Veiled Village, and that's the route I took and fought the Magmorm. If you're wondering or thinking why you should go this route, there's actually two reasons why. One, it's going to give you extra runes and practice at fighting a tanky boss that hits relatively hard, but also because he's going to drop the Magmorm Scale Sword, a Strength and Faith weapon. This is actually a very popular weapon, but for this IGN guide, we've got a lot of awesome mid and late game Faith builds. We didn't end up using this one, but it is a fun weapon to play around with. For this, we moved on with level 50 stats, upgrading strength and dexterity so we could use the Jellyfish Shield. Now on to the Altless Plateau and starting the mid-game. As we move towards the mid-game, this is when Faith starts to get really powerful. Right here on the map, which I showed there, you want to grab the second Smithing Stone Bell Bearing so you can upgrade a lot of your seals to plus 12. We are going to be getting some more seals as we move on here because there's different seals that boost different incantations. Next up here, after we defeat this boss, I'm going to show on the map where to grab the Ritual Swords Talisman, an awesome talisman that boosts your damage by 10% at full HP. This is an incredibly useful talisman for us because we're going to be at full HP a lot hanging back and casting. It's at Lux Ruins, not far from the Erdtree Gazing Hills site of Grace in the Altless Plateau. Be sure to grab this. The next talisman we recommend at IGN for a Faith build is the Godfrey icon, which boosts your damage by 15% when you're using chargeable spells and incantations and when you charge them. This is where it is on the map. Next up is the Lightning Scorpion Charm, which boosts your lightning damage by 12% at Windham Catacombs. When you move up to Mount Gelmur, you can get the Fire Scorpion Charm, which will increase fire damage by 12%. There it is on the map there. It's at the top of this fort. You have to jump over the side here and grab it near this ghost, and it is very helpful for fire builds. Next up is the Golden Vow Incantation. I'll show it on the map again real quick. This is where you grab it, and by the way, Anastasia will invade you a second time here. Next up, we recommend defeating Radahn at Redmane Castle. Speaking of which, there is a portal in the fort to the right of Rotview Balcony. That same fort has a portal to get there. You can use the summons easily and gain a lot of runes. Next up here on the map at Mount Gelmur, you can grab the Erdtree seal. This is a seal that's weightless and is very good at high faith. At lower levels, we do have some better options, but we recommend grabbing this one too. Another recommendation we have for right now before we head into the mid-game builds is to take on the second tree avatar in Caelid because he can give you a defensive tier that's quite good, but he also, more importantly, can give you over 100,000 runes with the Golden Scarab. This could be incredibly helpful for your build as we move forward. Next up, to get the Blasphemous Blade, you will have to take on Rykard at Volcano Manor. Lucky for you, it's relatively a gimmick boss fight overall, and grabbing the Serpent Hunter, especially if you have the Mimic summon, can make it very easy. The Blasphemous Blade is hands down possibly the best weapon in the entire game, and you can get this at Volcano Manor working through the dungeon. Be sure to hand this in to Eni at the Round Table Hold, as you're going to want to grab the Blasphemous Blade as soon as possible. It is an amazing weapon. Next thing we recommend getting, although this boss can be a little bit tough if you're using Black Flame, decently fire resistant, is Scouring Black Flame, which can add on to your Black Flame build, and you can also grab Black Flame Tornado on the Godskin Peeler. And now it's time for our mid-game showcase, where we're going to show off different builds, 4 different builds. We're going to show the stats, equipment, everything that you need to know for these ones too, and what we recommend here at IGN. For a mid-game Black Flame build, the best possible setup is to use Scouring Black Flame up close or for larger targets, and then when you back off, use the simple Black Flame Fireball in combination with the Jellyfish Shield for a lot of damage. Yeah, for the mid-game, this is a solid one. Between the percentage damage and the fire damage, you'll be taking down bosses pretty easily using a setup like this one. We're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know for a mid-game Black Flame build. And for our mid-game Black Flame build, we have the Broadsword, we have the Godslayer Seer plus 12, we have the Jellyfish Shield, same set of armor on, Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, Flame Tier, and Faith Tier. Before we do the lightning showcase, be sure to grab the gravel stone seal in the capital. Now we're at the capital, which is pretty much the mid-game. You're going to want to grab this seal since it boosts your lightning incantations, dragon cult incantations by 15%. And this is exactly how you get to it. From the west capital rampart site of grace, you're going to continue moving forward, and then you're going to go over the side, the left side facing the gargoyle, and once you get down there, there is a knight. The knight that's on the ground will drop the gravelstone seal. And now for our mid-game lightning build, the lightning caster build. This uses a combination of lightning spear and honed bolt. Lightning spear is chargeable, by the way, and boosted by the Godfrey icon, and honed bolt after you use it can be spammed for quick damage. At the end here, we will be using honed bolt to finish off Godfrey Golden Shade. This isn't too tough of a boss fight either if you choose to use lightning, as Golden Shade has 0 lightning resistance. In the end, absolutely an effective way to take him down, and a way we recommend here at IGN. We are going to show the lightning build, stats, equipment, everything you need to know for this awesome mid-game setup. And for our mid-game lightning build, we have the broadsword once again. We're using the gravelstone seal and the jellyfish shield. We have the same armor set on that we started with. We have the ritual swords talisman, lightning scorpion charm, Godfrey icon. We just got our last talisman spot, and we have the lightning tier and faith tier too. The next one before we do our holy mid-game build, right here on the map is where you can grab the black knife. We want to grab the black knife, which is at the middle dungeon in the Altless Plateau, and you have to defeat the black knife assassin that's outside to grab this, and this does a lot of holy damage. The Ash of War scales entirely with your faith stat. Alright, now let's show off the black knife build in the mid-game. A very good option for the mid-game, doing percentage and holy damage. One of the best holy options for the mid-game is the black knife, and you're going to see we get substantial damage out of this weapon's Ash of War. It's a really cool one to use too. A lot of people love the Ash of War, the animation as a whole, being able to send out the black blades, and then of course the percentage damage on some of the bigger bosses with high HP pools. It ends up taking a good percentage of their HP off. Like this dragon in the Altless Plateau, which can always be a tough boss battle due to the resistances that Lanciax has, but if you continue to hit these dragons in the head with a black knife, you can even mix in Black Flame, by the way, if you want to, since it's helpful here. You can take a lot of percentage damage off some of the tougher bosses. And keep in mind, most of the dragons in the game take extra damage to the head, so that's a huge bonus there when you have an Ash of War like this, which you can easily target their head and hit it for massive damage. We're able to take out the dragon there with our Black Knife mid-game build. Yeah, the concept here is very simple. Just use the Black Knife Ash of War as much as you can, and you can even mix in Black Flame if you want to too. Let's jump into equipment. For our mid-game Black Knife build, we have the Black Knife. We have the same armor set we started with, Godslayer Seal, Ritual Swords Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, Golden Scarab for some extra runes, Holy Tier, Faith Tier. Now, if you want to make a really cool pyro build for the mid-game, after you grab the Blasphemous Blade, you can grab Flame of the Fell God in Liurny of the Lakes if you want to add on to it. This is a pretty good incantation for the early and mid-game overall because it can do massive fire damage. In the late game, it falls off a bit, but this is a solid one to grab and to add to a pyro build. And now we're going to showcase our mid-game pyro build. For this, we're combining Flame of the Fell God. You could throw in Catch Flame too, that's a solid addition to this build. And then we're using the Ash of War on the Blasphemous Blades, Taker's Flames, to heal back HP, which scales entirely with Faith. So the weapon itself is strength and faith, so anytime you're hitting with the weapon or making physical contact, it's going to scale with strength too. But that Ash of War, every time you use it, is just going to pull directly from your faith stat. So the more faith you have, the more investment in your faith stat, the stronger Taker's Flames is. It really is that simple. It works much in the way like the Black Knife that we showed off, where the Ash of War is entirely your faith stats. So once you have the minimum requirements on the weapon, you can just invest in faith, and then you could use that Ash of War to heal back HP, do massive fire damage, and really it's relatively easy mode with the Blasphemous Blade. It truly may be one of the best weapons, if not the best weapon in the game. And then, of course, Flame of the Fell God and Catch Flame are good additions too. Now, you're not always going to need that because the Blasphemous Blade is reliable enough on its own, but being able to run a full pyro build that has incantations too can also be a lot of fun. And we did get hit at the end there, of course, by the end of Morgott. It can be a little bit of a tough fight. There is a summon at the door as well for this one if you need them. It's Melina, so that's very helpful. She's very helpful. Let's jump into equipment for this one. And we have the Blasphemous Blade at +6. We have the Godslayer Seal. We're using the same armor set for this video. We have the Ritual Swords, Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, Golden Scarab, Flame Tier, and the Faith Tier, of course. And we're in the end game now. Make sure you pick up the Smithing Bell Bearing 3 here. That's very important once you get to Mountaintops of the Giants. It's right there, not far from Zamar Ruins. Next up after that, you should get the Giants Prayer Book, and here it is on the map at the Guardians Garrison in Mountaintops of the Giants. And don't forget about our friend the Turtle Pope, who has made a few appearances in this video. We're going to hand him the Giants Prayer Book, and you can grab 2 very good incantations in Flame of the Fell God and Giant's Flame Take Thee. These are solid additions. Next up in the dungeon, Giants Conquering Hero's Grave, you can grab the Giant Seal. This will increase the incantations that we actually just showed, and this is a really good seal to have because you could trade in the Fire Giant's Remembrance for Burn o' Flame too. Yeah, this will boost Burn o' Flame as well, which is a really good incantation. There it is on the map there. And after you take down the Fire Giant, our recommendation at IGN is to use it for Burn o' Flame, his Remembrance. Don't forget you can duplicate it and get the other one, which is a whip, but the Burn o' Flame incantation's much better. Next up is the book for Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike. It's in the middle of the room I was just in. I picked it up at the very beginning, and that's going to give us Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike, which is a phenomenal lightning incantation. There it is on the map there at Tempest Facing Balcony. Alright, I think this might be the last time we show the Turtle Pope, but you're going to need 10,000 runes for this one because it's a little bit on the expensive side runes-wise, but it is well worth it. This is probably the best lightning incantation in the game. Make sure you grab this one as a faith build. It's very powerful. Lastly is the Phlox Canvas Talisman. You're going to get this at the end of Millicent's questline. The questline for that, as well as the Shard of Alexander, is in the description below. IGN has very good guides for that. After you destroy Gowry, after Millicent has died, you can grab the Phlox Canvas Talisman, which increases incantations. And now, starting our endgame builds. I couldn't be more excited for this one. This is going to be great. First things first, we have the Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike build, which is incredible for big targets and does massive lightning damage. Yeah, this one involves the Jellyfish Shield and, of course, the Gravelstone Seal for that 15% boost to Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike. By the way, all these are rune level 125 builds where we're going to be showing off stats, equipment, everything that you need to know to turn in these into powerful endgame faith builds. Yeah, when faith truly shines is at the end of the game, no question. It becomes so powerful, and you have everything in your arsenal to make these great builds. Let's jump into equipment. We have the Gravelstone Seal and the Jellyfish Shield. We have the Confessor Armor on again, Ritual Swords Talisman, Lightning Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, Phlox Canvas Talisman, Lightning Tier, Faith Tier, and we're buffing with Golden Vow and Halashabriri. And now to our endgame Black Flame build. Now there's a couple different things you could do with this one. If you want to use Black Flame Tornado, it scales entirely with your Faith stat. Black Flame, Ritual, and Scouring Black Flame are better for large targets, but for me, I stuck with a simple Black Flame Fireball. If you're wondering why the chosen build for this one is so simple, built around the Black Flame Fireball, it's because the buffs in the endgame and the setup we have and the distance you could use the Black Flame Fireball from makes it a very, very easy build to use and to do massive damage to the majority of bosses. And it's actually a reasonable amount of FP to use it each time too, and unlike Black Flame Tornado, you don't have to worry about the lack of hyper armor or anything because you're going to be from a distance most of the time. We took on Godfrey and Horolu here in one attempt, and it was really easy with the Black Flame Fireball. Yeah, it's really cool running a Black Flame build late game with just the simple Fireball. It's so convenient. It's going to make your life a lot easier. If you're looking to make a Black Flame build, though, add in Black Flame Tornado and Scouring Black Flame. Black Flame Ritual is really only for the bigger targets in the game. Overall, though, you can add to this one for sure. Now, you can see the effectiveness of it here, though. It truly is effective. You're not using a ton of FP each time you use it. You're getting around 2,000 to 3,000 damage per cast if you're able to charge it. It's boosted by the Godfrey icon, too, because it is chargeable and all around a great incantation. Yeah, one that can carry you through the end game too. You can see here against Horolu, it is really convenient being able to just use that Black Flame Fireball really quickly, and we're able to get in a nice dodge there towards the end and continue to get the percentage damage that Black Flame offers too. And that is a total, I believe, of 2%. I think it's between 2 and 5% depending on the boss's HP, something like that it takes off. It's going to take that percentage off every time you use the Black Flame Fireball. And we're at the end here. We finished off Godfrey and Horolu. We're going to jump into stats, equipment, everything you need to know. And we have the Godslayer seal, the Jellyfish shield. You had the same armor set on the whole time. Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm. We have the Godfrey icon, the Phlox Canvas Talisman, and then we have the Flame tier, Faith tier, and we're buffing with Howler Shabiri, and we're using Golden Vow too. And next up, we have our endgame Pyro build. This is a really good one for massive fire damage. We're using Burno Flame here in combination with the Blasphemous Blade too, because that's fire damage. And as we mentioned earlier, it scales entirely with your Faith stat. This is an awesome combination. Like most of the seals, this one does have a boost, and it's going to boost the fire incantations we're using by 20%. It actually does a solid 20%. There's Giant's Flame Take Thee. We just hit for 1,688 damage. Pretty solid there. And now for this combination, I like to run the seal in my left hand and the weapon in my right. If you're just using the fire incantations, then use the giant seal in your right hand, and then in your left hand, you'd use the jellyfish shield for the buff. And you'd probably be hitting on Giant's Flame Take Thee for closer to 2,000 with that setup. But I like this setup because you get to use the Blasphemous Blade, which is so good in your main hand, and then you get to use your fire incantations in your offhand, giving you a ton of versatility. Out of all the ones on this list, the one we recommend the most at IGN is this build right here, because the Blasphemous Blade is so easy to use. If you're ever struggling in Elden Ring, this weapon could be perfect for you. Add in fire incantations and you can have a lot of fun with it too. Yeah, try this one out. Try these endgame builds out. You're going to be shocked with the amount of damage you can get. We have the Blasphemous Blade, Giant Seal. We have the same armor set on. Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, Shard of Alexander. That quest is in the description. Flame tier, Faith tier, Golden Vow, and Howler Shabiri. And now into our endgame Holy build. Now, out of all these, Holy isn't the best damage type in the endgame because it is highly resisted by some of the late game bosses, but there is a great combination you can make that does a lot of percentage damage in using the Black Knife and Black Blade incantation. If you have high faith, the Black Knife and Black Blade incantations do massive Holy and percentage damage together. If you're a Strength and Faith build, the Black Blade Sword is a great option. Both the Black Blade weapon and incantation can be gained from Remembrance of the Black Blade. Don't forget you can duplicate remembrances at the bell towers when you bring them down, and you can end up getting both weapons. So in this case, you can grab the incantation, and then you can grab the weapon and try it out later too, because the weapon's a lot of fun to use as well. But if you're going for high faith, the Black Blade incantation's the better option. It actually has a move set, by the way, where you could use it twice in a row too. And if you have two seals, one in one hand, one in the offhand, one in your main, one in your offhand, you can actually do a different move set too with it, which is pretty cool. So it's pretty awesome all around, and it does combine well with the Black Knife. Yeah, I end up running out of FP here, but in a second we're going to show you what it can do. It can actually hit twice, which is really cool. You get the first one, and then you get the second one, and you get some cool flips in between too. We're going to jump into equipment stats. We have the Black Knife +9, we have the Godslayer Seal, same armor set in the Confessor set, Ritual Swords Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Phlox Canvas Talisman, Holy tier, Faith tier. We're buffing with Howler Shabiri and Golden Vow. Something we want to mention real quick at IGN, when you're playing Elden Ring, which is an amazing game, and it can be a massive game and intimidating at times, be sure to have fun in between, do what you enjoy best, and whatever builds you like using, go with that. Use whatever you like using, you enjoy using, and keep the game fun. And of course, with all the great options available for Faith, you'll be taking down bosses and enemies easily. Even with Elden Ring being a challenging and big game, you'll be taking them down pretty fast with the amazing builds that Faith has to offer.
And that's all for now, Tarnished. All that's left for you is to give Miquella a handshake and make your way into Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. If you still want more Elden Ring content, don't miss our review of Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, and for even more comprehensive coverage, tips, and walkthroughs, be sure to check out our guide for the game on IGN.com. And of course, for everything else video games, keep it locked on IGN.